Have you ever wondered how a small group of men managed to dominate battlefields for centuries, facing seemingly unbeatable enemies? Well, the answer lies in the strategy behind the legendary Greek Phalanx. But here's a fact few people share. The secret of these warriors wasn't just in their strength or weapons, but something much deeper: discipline, unity, and a mindset that can transform not only battles, but also lives. Yes, there's more to the story of the Phalanx than spears and shields. And now comes the most intriguing part. While the modern world is chasing after cutting-edge technologies and tactics, the Greeks had already discovered, over 2,000 years ago, a model of excellence that still inspires today. But are you ready to understand what made the Phalanx so revolutionary? Get ready, because the secrets we're about to reveal might change the way you approach challenges. What makes this so fascinating is that these lessons aren't just about ancient wars. They apply to everyday battles, at work, in relationships, in the pursuit of personal goals. After all, who doesn't want to be as impenetrable as the Phalanx? Who wouldn't like to use strategy to win instead of relying solely on brute force? If you've ever felt like something's missing to face your own enemies, stick with me, because you're about to discover something powerful. But beware, what follows isn't a simple story. It's a deep dive into the strategic minds of ancient Greek warriors, with lessons that few dare to teach. And you know what's even more curious? Many ignore the power of these ideas because they think they belong to the past. But you, who's here, know that knowledge is a weapon, and you're about to wield it like a true hoplite. So are you ready to become unbeatable? The warriors of Greece have already left their clues. Now it's your turn to decipher them. Let's go. The story of the Greek Phalanx begins way back in 700 BC, when Greece was taking its first steps toward military supremacy. Imagine a group of ordinary men, farmers, artisans, and merchants, putting down their tools and picking up weapons to defend their lands. That's how the Phalanx was born, a formation that looked more like a human wall. Each soldier, known as a hoplite, was a key piece of a true strategic puzzle. And you know what's most impressive? All of this arose from an almost instinctual need to survive and dominate. The idea was as simple as it was brilliant. Line up dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men side by side, with their shields touching and their spears pointed forward. Now, think about it. How much discipline and coordination that required. It was almost like dancing in sync, but with armor and under the pressure of an advancing enemy. Back then, there was no improvisation on the battlefield. Every movement of the Phalanx was rehearsed because a gap meant defeat. And of course, we can't forget that the Phalanx formation wasn't just about brute strength. It was a clever military strategy that combined discipline with psychology. For opponents, facing a wall of shields and spears was, at the very least, intimidating. Many would retreat before the fight even began, realizing they were up against something almost impenetrable. After all, who in their right mind would charge against a wall of iron and determination? The Phalanx was also a reflection of Greek society itself. A soldier didn't fight for himself. He fought for the group, for his neighbor, for the city. This sense of collectivity was what gave strength to the formation. Without it, the Phalanx would collapse like a house of cards. No wonder this military structure became known as one of the greatest symbols of Hellenic unity, proving that together they were stronger. But not everything was so static. Over time, tactics evolved, and the Phalanx gained layers of complexity. It was as if the Greeks were constantly refining a military masterpiece. Want to know how these men handled the weight and pressure of being on the front lines? This brings us to the next point: the equipment that turned civilians into true hoplites ready for battle. Being a Greek hoplite wasn't for the faint-hearted, and it started with the weight each soldier carried. Imagine wearing bronze armor, with a helmet that almost suffocated your peripheral vision, and still holding a gigantic shield known as the aspis. This shield, nearly a meter in diameter, was a true protective tank, but also a test of physical endurance. Add to that a 2.5-meter-long spear, a short sword and leg protections, and the total weight reached an impressive 35 kilos. Yes, my friend, it was a real strength test even before stepping onto the battlefield. And the most curious part, all this gear wasn't worn all the time. Hoplites only fully armed up moments before entering combat, like a transformation ritual. It was as if, by donning the equipment, they ceased to be ordinary men and became living symbols of Greek military strategy. Think about it, every piece of armor had a purpose, and nothing was superfluous. The helmet, for example, not only provided protection, but also intimidated, with its elaborate plumes that increased height and commanded respect. But let's face it, carrying so much weight and still fighting efficiently wasn't easy. The spear, the main weapon of attack, required incredible strength to handle. At 2.5 meters long, it was balanced with a metal fitting at the base, known as the lizard, which helped keep it stable. This detail made all the difference when combat heated up and hoplites needed agility to attack and defend. Now imagine the physical toll, running, marching, and fighting under the scorching sun, wearing heavy armor and carrying a shield that felt like a door. Still, the hoplites were trained for this. Their cities invested in discipline and training because they knew that equipment alone wouldn't win battles. It was the combination of man and metal that made the difference. And at the heart of this preparation was a fundamental element: trust in the group. Every hoplite knew that his shield protected not only himself, but also the comrade next to him. This sense of interdependence was what made the Phalanx almost invincible. But to understand how all this machinery worked in harmony, we need to talk about the tight formation and impeccable coordination that marked the essence of the Phalanx. If there's one word that defines the Greek Phalanx, that word is unity. The soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, formed a living wall of shields and spears, moving as if they were one body. To maintain such synchronization, each hoplite had to trust blindly the man beside him. It's curious to think how this seemingly simple formation was so sophisticated. Every movement was calculated, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was left to chance. The flautist, for example, dictated the marching rhythm with hypnotic melodies, ensuring the group moved like an orchestra on the battlefield. And don't think it was easy to maintain this coordination. The pressure was immense. One wrong step could create a fatal gap, exposing the Phalanx to chaos. Imagine a row of perfectly aligned dominoes. If one falls, they all fall. That's why the training was intense and repetitive, almost obsessive. It was more than marching in a straight line. It was learning to feel the group's movement, almost like a military dance. This impeccable coordination turned each hoplite into a vital piece of an ingenious war machine. But the true secret of the tight formation was the shield, the famous aspis. It wasn't just personal protection. It was also the defense of the comrade next to you. Every soldier carried the responsibility of keeping the line firm, protecting not only himself, but the entire unit. And let's agree, that's a powerful lesson that goes far beyond the battlefield. Collective success depends on individual effort. If everyone does their part, the whole remains unshakable. Interestingly, the Phalanx also had a devastating psychological effect. For the enemy, it was like facing a moving iron wall. Many would give up before the fight even began, unable to imagine a way to break that impenetrable formation. And this shows us how Greek military strategy wasn't just about brute force. It was also a mind game, where the visual impact of the Phalanx played a crucial role. However, all this precision and unity wouldn't hold up without a weapon to match. And that's exactly where the spear comes into play, the main instrument that turned the phalanx into a lethal force. Want to know how? Let's explore that now. The spear, or doru, was the soul of the Greek phalanx, and every hoplite knew that its effectiveness on the battlefield depended on the skill to wield it. At 2.5 meters long, it wasn't just an attack weapon, but also a symbol of strategy and precision. Imagine the impact of dozens of spears pointed forward, ready to pierce the first enemy that dared to approach. The iron tip was as sharp as a razor, capable of piercing armor and shields, while the metal base, known as the lizard, provided balance and served as a reserve if the spear broke. The design of this weapon was meticulously thought out. The sharp tip aimed to pierce whatever stood in its path, but the metal base was a genius move. When the top part broke, which wasn't uncommon in fierce combat, the hoplite didn't remain defenseless. He would simply turn the spear around and use the other end, which was equally deadly in close-quarters fighting. This versatility made the doru indispensable and reinforced the ingenuity of Greek military strategy. The spear's position also played a strategic role within the formation. The front ranks held them horizontally, creating a deadly barrier for the enemy. Meanwhile, the soldiers in the back positioned them upward, acting as a sort of protection against projectiles like arrows and stones. It was a true display of coordination, where each row had a specific function, but all worked with a single purpose: to annihilate the enemy and keep the phalanx intact. And let's not forget that the spear required a perfect balance between strength and technique. Wielding it for hours under the weight of armor was a test of physical and mental endurance. It wasn't just about attacking, it was about knowing the right moment to advance or retreat, to pierce or protect. This makes us think about how discipline and training shaped these warriors into true combat machines. And of course, all of this contributed to the phalanx's success in countless battles. But even with all the spear's power, the true strength of the phalanx lay in its resilience. The defensive formation that the hoplites created was so robust that it seemed impossible to break. Want to know how they turned defense into an even more feared weapon? Let's find out now. The defensive strength of the Greek phalanx was so impressive that many adversaries preferred to avoid direct confrontation. When you think of a formation like this, it's almost inevitable to compare it to a moving wall. The combination of shields, spears, and discipline created a barrier that seemed impossible to penetrate. Imagine, for a moment, the sight of a solid line of hoplites advancing, protected by their huge shields and ready to withstand any frontal attack. This wasn't just a military strategy, it was a declaration of invincibility. The secret behind this resilience lay in the unity of the shields. Each hoplite protected not only himself, but also the comrade next to him, forming a true human fortress. This solidarity on the battlefield was what made the phalanx nearly impenetrable. Even against a rain of arrows, darts, or stones, they maintained the formation, advancing like an unstoppable force. It wasn't just courage, it was the certainty that together they could face anything. Another fascinating feature of the phalanx was its ability to adapt. When a soldier fell, another immediately took his place, keeping the formation intact. It was as if the phalanx were a living organism, regenerating in real time. This constant replacement ability ensured that the enemy never found a gap. For the Greeks, this symbolized the resilience of their culture and their belief in the strength of the collective. But of course, defense wasn't just about passive resistance. The phalanx turned defense into offense. By repelling enemy attacks and maintaining their solid line, they paved the way for a devastating counterattack. It was like a predator waiting for the exact moment to strike. This dynamic kept adversaries constantly pressured, unsure how to handle such a formidable defensive force. However, like everything in life, the phalanx had its weak points. Despite its front strength being almost invulnerable, There were vulnerabilities that needed to be compensated for. Want to know what these points were and how the Greeks dealt with them? That's what we're going to uncover now. As imposing as the Greek phalanx was, even it had its weaknesses. After all, no strategy is perfect, and what the phalanx gained in defensive strength, it lost in mobility. Imagine trying to turn quickly with dozens of tightly packed men carrying shields and spears. It wasn't just difficult, it was practically impossible. This limitation made the formation an easy target for poorly protected flanks or surprise attacks from unexpected directions. And in the heat of battle, such a flaw could be fatal. This lack of mobility also made the phalanx dependent on flat terrain. Uneven fields, mountains, or dense forests were nightmares for any Greek commander. On terrain where the formation couldn't align perfectly, the entire strategy would collapse like a sandcastle. That's why Greek generals carefully chose battle locations, always seeking the ideal terrain to maximize the phalanx's effectiveness. It was a chess game where the battlefield was just as important as the pieces. Another significant weakness was the dependence on auxiliary troops, like cavalry and archers, to protect the flanks. The phalanx, despite its power, couldn't defend against fast and light attacks on its own. Enemy cavalry in particular was a constant threat, capable of outflanking the formation and attacking the most vulnerable soldiers in the rear. Therefore, the Greeks needed to combine different types of troops to cover the phalanx's gaps. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was what kept them competitive on the battlefield. And perhaps the biggest challenge was discipline. The phalanx required impeccable coordination, and any mistake could cost dearly. If a soldier broke formation out of fear or impatience, the entire group was exposed. It was a brutal lesson on the cost of disorder. This makes us reflect even the best strategies depend on execution. Without discipline, even the most well-trained phalanx became useless. These limitations began to appear more frequently as new tactics and formations emerged. The very evolution of warfare would force the phalanx to face challenges that, in some cases, it simply couldn't overcome. And this brings us to the next point: how the phalanx, after centuries of dominance, began to lose ground to even more adaptable and innovative formations. The Greek phalanx reigned for centuries as the most feared military formation in the ancient world. However, nothing lasts forever, and even the strongest find an opponent that surpasses them. In the case of the phalanx, the final blow came with the rise of the Roman legions. Unlike the phalanx, the legions were extremely mobile, flexible, and capable of quickly adapting to any situation on the battlefield. Imagine an army that could attack on multiple fronts, reorganize in seconds, and still maintain relentless cohesion. That's exactly what the Romans brought to the military scene. The legions took advantage of what the phalanx couldn't offer: agility and diversified strategy. While the phalanx excelled on flat terrain and in direct confrontations, the Romans could maneuver in any type of terrain, exploiting forests, hills, and even urban areas. Additionally, their smaller formations allowed for greater autonomy among units, something the rigid structure of the phalanx couldn't replicate. It was like comparing a sturdy battleship to a fleet of agile boats, each with its merits, but with clear situational advantages. Another decisive factor was weaponry and training. Roman legionaries carried pilums, throwing spears that destroyed, shields before close combat, and their short swords, the gladii, were ideal for fighting in tight spaces. The phalanx, on the other hand, relied almost exclusively on long spears, which lost efficiency in close quarters combat. Here, we see how innovation defeated tradition. The Romans found ways to neutralize the phalanx's strengths while exploiting its weaknesses. And we can't forget the impact of social and political changes in Greece. As the Greek city-states lost their independence and were incorporated into larger empires, the use of the phalanx became increasingly uncommon. Maintaining it required constant training and significant resources, something many cities simply couldn't sustain anymore. Additionally, the very collective mindset that gave strength to the Phalanx began to disintegrate, replaced by mercenary armies less committed to the ideal of unity. Still, the legacy of the Phalanx lives on today, not just as a military strategy, but as a symbol of Greek ingenuity and determination. And if you've made it this far, you've already realized that the story of these warriors is much more than just a lesson in war tactics. It's a journey about discipline, unity, and adaptation. But what can all this teach us about our daily battles? It's a reflection that continues to resonate today. And now that you've uncovered the secrets of the Greek Phalanx, the question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you just admire the genius of the ancients, or start applying these lessons in your own life? Think about it. How can you use the relentless discipline of the hoplites to achieve your goals? How can you adopt the collective mindset of the Phalanx to build strong and resilient teams? And most importantly, what's stopping you from forming your own impenetrable wall against the challenges you face daily? Remember, every shield in the Phalanx was vital, but alone it didn't have the same impact. You don't need to fight your battles alone. Who's beside you? Who are the people holding the shield with you? Maybe it's time to strengthen your alliances, adjust your strategies, and prepare your ground, just like Greek generals did before marching to war. And here's a challenge. What changes can you make today to become as strategic as these warriors? Are you willing to plan, train, and act with the same determination? The story of the Greeks teaches us that the best results come from preparation and flawless execution. There are no shortcuts, but there are rewards for those willing to take the first step. Finally, how about continuing this journey with us? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you'll learn not only about the Greek Phalanx, but also about the greatest strategies in history that can transform the way you think, act, and win. Because in the end, every great warrior knows, knowledge is the most powerful weapon of all. Are you ready to wield it?